listening to Hooked on Startups, where every week you'll hear from some of the most talented, inspiring, and successful entrepreneurs who shared their real-life stories, how they overcame challenges and failures, and how they mastered success. Get ready for some of the best business tips, tricks and tactics, and some frank, unscripted discussions. Here's your host, Matthew Sullivan.
In today's episode on Hooked on Startups, I'm absolutely delighted to have Bernie Swain with me. Bernie, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you. This is a great honor. I'm looking forward to this.
Well, and where do I begin to tell people about who you are and what you've done? I'll rattle through it, and I'll probably do a terrible job, but you're the co-founder and chief executive of Washington Speakers Bureau. Now, the Washington Speakers Bureau is the leading lecture agency in the country. Since 1980, you've been the top agency. You've represented 3 presidents, 5 prime ministers, 5 secretaries of state, and you've just published a book. Well, not just, you published a book last year, which is What Made Me Who I Am, which is a fantastic book, and where you've managed to get underneath the skin of these people and find out who they are as real personalities. I can tell you it's an absolutely compelling read. So, again, Bernie, welcome, and I can't wait to find out more about this incredible journey.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. And you did good introduction, so thank you.
Well, it's great. And we also have the power of editing. So if it does go wrong, we can always go back.
My favorite word.
Exactly. All ills are cured by the word edit.
Right.
But the first real question is, before we get into how you actually ended up being, the owner and boss of the most successful speakers agency, is how difficult is it to actually get under the real personality? Because with some of the people that you've interviewed here, Terry Bradshaw, Madeleine Albright, Condoleezza Rice, Colin Powell, Tony Blair, these are world leaders who have created this protective layer, as it were. And your relationship with them from the beginning has to have been a very professional relationship. So how difficult was it to go back to them and to say, I want to talk about the real you. So let's forget about the public persona. Tell me what made you who you are.
Well, when I first started to write the book, one of the people I wanted to put in the book was Bob Woodward, the great investigative journalist back in the Watergate era. And Bob called me on the phone before I even started interviewing anybody. And he says, the difficult thing you're going to have about this book is that the people are going to want you to know what they want you to know. Exactly. They're going to put that PR kind of public relations kind of mask on everything they tell you, because it's hard to get behind the skin of people. And he ought to know, because he's always looked from the story behind the story. So I had a great relationship with these people. So I don't think it was any different than if you were talking to your neighbor or a friend and you're trying to get the real truth about how they feel and the experiences they're going through. I had to do sometimes 2 and 3 interviews because I would start out talking about, tell me about your life and what you've done. And then they would open up about something that I hadn't heard before, or an avenue or a path that I wanted to take. And so I would listen to the tapes again, and then I would go back and have another second interview and follow that path in life to try to find out the real story. So it is difficult to look behind, but it's difficult to look behind the PR, the public relations kind of atmosphere that we all put and mask in front of ourselves. It's hard. If you ask me, to tell the story of my real life, I'd probably be reluctant to open up about some of the things that were difficult. And that's exactly what I was trying to do, to find the things that were difficult and the turning points that they overcame.
And I think that's the biggest challenge. You're absolutely right. And did you go in with the expectation that there would be a particular outcome, or were you surprised by some of the things that you heard, not just in terms of the things that you weren't aware of, but just the openness or were there a number of common characteristics that began to emerge from all of these people?
I was very surprised by the openness of the people I was talking to. The key was to ask the right questions, you know, to not. I wrote the first time I wrote the book and wrote these stories. I had a lot of information about the jobs that they had and what influence that they had in their jobs and the experiences they had in their jobs, and I had to take that all out, because what I was looking for was the personal turning points, so that these turning points relate to all of us.
Yeah.
And what I found really is that we all experience the same kind of turning points in life. There are people who come into our lives that change our lives. We experience uniquely different moments in time, and then we all experience unexpected events in life. And so what I found was that we all in life, all of these people experience the same kind of turning points. These people who came into their lives, the moments in time, and those unexpected events, and they all followed. What I found about their turning points all fell in those three categories.
And turning point is something that you experienced, which really put you on this path from the very beginning. So if we wind the clock back to 1979, 1980, and you tell the story brilliantly in the introduction chapters of your book, but effectively, I think the key phrase that you use is, I think, what is it? The introduction, it starts with a preposterous idea. So,
right.
So this whole...
Well, I mean, no one in my family ever attended college before. So my mother's side of the family were farmers who lived off the land in central Virginia. My father grew up in the poorest of mining towns and spent part of his childhood in an orphanage. So there was never, when I was a teenager, any conversation about me going to college. Now, these were good people. They were down-to-earth people, but I wasn't going to college, except for I had a teacher in school who encouraged me to go. He was the athletic director. He was the football coach of the school. And so he led me on this path of becoming a teacher and an athletic director or a coach. And by the time I was 36, I had been offered my dream job as athletic director of a major university. And that's when somebody sent me a copy of Fortune magazine. I read an article in Fortune magazine, and in there was a story about that, at the time, the largest lecture agency in the world. And that lecture agency, the story had just walked into the Gerald Ford White House and picked up Gerald Ford, Henry Kissinger, and Alexander Haig as clients. Near the end of the article, the author quotes Henry Kissinger as complaining about the high commission rate that this agency wanted to charge, and says, "Why don't I sign with one of your competitors?" And he said, "I have no competitors." So I took the article home. I left it on the coffee table. When I came home, my wife said, "Have you read this article?" And she said, "You know, you come home several times a week complaining about the bureaucracy of university life, and I'm not going to sure you're ever going to be happy in your dream job." So she talked me into giving up my dream job and starting a lecture agency with no experience, no plan, and no money.
Of course. I mean, is there any other way? But that must have been, I mean, that must have been an incredibly difficult. I'm just trying to visualize the sort of the process where you have your dream job. So you have everything that you need. You have security. You have the credibility of being in the top position. So and many people have this sneaking or this gnawing feeling that what they're doing is not quite who they're supposed to be. But I'd say nearly 99 people out of 100 would ignore that. And is it that characteristic, the ability to say, hang on a minute, let's explore this, that really differentiates the people who are the people in your book from the people that don't make that leap?
Well, that teacher in high school was a turning point for me. So it led me on a 17-year career path in athletics and teaching. So then my wife comes along and she talks me into giving up this 17-year career. And I trusted what she said. I mean, and the key to this is two things. One, having somebody who understands you and putting your faith in that person, that you believe they have your best interest at heart. And then taking from that a sense of excitement about what you can accomplish because somebody believes in you. And I don't remember ever being scared. I've been asked that question before. I don't remember being scared. You know, we had a 1-year-old baby. I put a second mortgage on my home, and now we had $55,000 on a $60,000, $55,000 of mortgage on a $60,000 house at 12% interest rate. And then we started our business in a stationery closet, and I spent 14 months in a stationery closet with no success. But I never doubted myself because my wife believed in me. And there was a sense that she was right. And I think if we pay attention to our turning points, if we pay attention to these people who come into our lives, then we can sense that, you know, that somebody sees something in us maybe we're not paying attention to or we're overlooking.
And again, so if those 14 months must have been really challenging, because what happens is you have this sort of honeymoon period, I think, where someone tells you that they have faith and confidence in you. That boosts what you are kind of thinking about yourself, but
right.
It hasn't really come to the surface. So you go, great, okay, let's do it. Let's make a go of it. So you have this, you know, this in athletics, you know, you have the honeymoon period, but then there's this long sort of drawn out period of pain. And how did you get over that? I mean, every day you must have been thinking, you know, what have we done? It's for 14 months.
And that's a great quote, because back then there was no internet. So there was no way for me to know whether the guy's claim in the magazine that he had no competition was true or not. And we used to start a lecture agency without knowing what you're doing. We would simply sit there and think in that closet about famous names, and we try to find a telephone number or an address. No one would ever return our telephone calls, and our letters were returned from lawyers who saying, my client, this famous person, is under a written contract with another agency. Do not write us again or we'll sue you. So being there was no internet, for the very first time we discovered it, in addition to this agency that was in the magazine, there were 5 or 6 large agencies. So I do remember sitting in that closet, putting my head in my hand and thinking to myself, what have we done? But you know, you have to have a belief in yourself. I mean, part of this idea about turning points is that not only do you recognize the turning points, do I recognize that teacher in my life? Do I recognize my wife who may know something about me that I don't recognize in myself? But then it comes down to making good and wise decisions, feeling intuitively that you're making the right decisions. Then the key is committing yourself fully to that. And I was determined to commit myself one way or the other, so that there was no way later on that I couldn't say, you know, I gave up too quickly, or I should have followed that through. And how many of us in life end up saying to ourselves, you know, if only I had done this, only I had lasted a little bit longer, or why did I give up so quickly? And so I didn't want to say that to myself. So I stuck in that closet for 14 months before we had our first success, determined not to ever say that to myself.
And do you think the fact that you geared up your mortgage, that you made that commitment, you sort of burnt your bridges to a certain extent? Commitment is something that you mentioned just now. How important is it, do you think, for people to do something where there is no going back, particularly if they're moving into an entrepreneurial sort of situation?
Well, I think the sad thing about today is that young people tend to give up too quickly. You know, today there are more failures in entrepreneur endeavors than there are successes, and that's not been the case for the past 20 or 30 years. There have been more successes when you started a company on your own. So I think people today tend to give up too quickly. They don't have good examples in life besides social media personalities, and there's nothing to really drive them. And sometimes they're doing it all by themselves. So I think having somebody supporting you was what I hung on to. Could I have lasted if I didn't have my wife there supporting me and believing in me? Maybe not. But at the same time, no matter what I was going to do, I never wanted to get to the point in life where I said, you know, I just gave up too quickly. And I think, unfortunately, that's what we do today. We give us something a chance. It's like, we order something on Amazon and we get it in 2 days.
Yeah.
We want something quick, and if we don't get it, well, forget it. I don't want it. And that's the sad thing, I think, about life today.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you, because there is this whole concept of instant gratification and now, which is at odds with this, what you need to do to build a business. Now, I think in your book, the thing that comes out more than anything is the passion. And I think that's the thing that will be a clear driving influence. But I also want to talk about determination, because people talk a lot about passion. I think you do in a number of your interviews as well, where you talk about how important passion is. But I think, how important do you think that pure dogged determination element is as well?
I think it's vital. I do think you have to be passionate, and I do think passion is more important than having a talent. I'm not sure I had a talent for this to start out, but I was determined to make myself do it a good job at it. But that determination is saying, I've had that determination all my life, because even when we started to become successful, you'd have to go out and pitch to a president or pitch to a prime minister or a secretary of state. You're competing against 5 or 6 different agencies. And there's that determination that, one loss could lead to another loss. And so you never want to lose. I was so determined to succeed that I got everything I wanted to do lined up in advance. And the key to that is not only, okay, here's the things I have to do, but what happens along the line if something doesn't work? Then what is plan B? And then if that doesn't work, what's plan C? I was always thinking several layers deeper than just what am I going to do in trying to get this person to allow me to represent them? Or what am I going to do to accomplish something in life? I was always thinking deeper.
When you started the company, though, you had little, if any, experience in the business. So you went from one completely different career to a real startup in the truest sense. So the challenges for you must have been, first of all, just trying to figure out the industry in the absence of the internet. How important did you find those small wins? Because people talk about shooting for the moon, but did you find that those small wins, for example, when you found out that your competitors weren't the only guys in the business, things like that, how did that spur you on?
Yeah, I mean, the big wins are kind of like don't seem really important. It's the little things in life that count. I remember we got to 14 months and we were almost out of money. And I had when I was at the university, helped this guy named Steve Bell, who was with ABC, use the swimming pool for a news feature. Steve had been under a written contract, called me on the phone and said, my contract is up. They didn't produce for me. I'd be willing to give you a chance. That was after 14 months. So I went over to his office and we shook hands, and I came back, and on the ride back, I suddenly realized that I had not signed him to a written contract, which all agencies do.
Yeah.
And so I got back to my closet and I tried to justify this to my wife by saying, well, what good would it do to hold him to a piece of paper if he wasn't happy? That small little detail, that small little that mistake that turned into a small step turned out to be a defining moment for our company, and we never would have realized it, because Steve then went and told other friends of his that if you don't want to sign a written contract with an agency, you can go with these new little guys in town, shake their hands, and walk out on them anytime you want. That then added 5 or 6 new speakers to us. That really got the ball rolling rather than just having one speaker. And over the years, we have never signed a speaker with a written contract. It's always been with a handshake. And what that did, that small little victory, but that was really a mistake at the time, established an aura of trust between me and the speaker, me and my employees, because people said, I'm living up to my word. I don't have to sign a contract. I don't have to sign a piece of paper. I'm going to live up to what I say, and you can trust me.
And do you think that the success of the Washington Speakers Bureau is based on the fact that your clients, the presidents, the prime ministers, have the same challenge as you? In other words, trying to communicate trust, belief, trying to get people to understand what they really believe in. You demonstrated that by saying, I'll provide you with the best service. I'll provide you with something that you would, with someone that you want to work with. And if you don't like it, you can just walk away. So do you think that your ability to work with people as your authentic self, as it were,
right,
do you think that's what connected you and made you such a success with people that were facing the same sort of challenges?
there's no question. I remember sitting about 2 years after Steve Bell and those few Washington journalists came on board. I was sitting there thinking, okay, nobody else, no other agencies is shaking hands with anybody. They're all signing contracts. Maybe I can start cutting corners now. Maybe I can start signing people to contracts. I don't have to worry whether I'm going to make them happy, whether I can fail a couple times with them and then overcome it a month later, keep them to a 2-year contract. By the time 2 years is up, they'll still be happy. But rather than trying to make every single thing I did work and work well for them. And I got a letter at the time from a guy I was recruiting named Lou Holtz at
Notre Dame, and he said at the bottom of the letter he put three
questions. Can I trust you? Are you committed to success? And do you care about me? Now, those 3 questions were in every correspondent Lou ever sent. So it wasn't directed at me. I put the letter on my desk. I meant to file it away, and it stayed there for a day and then several days. And then I picked it up, trying to figure out why I couldn't file this letter away. And then I suddenly realized, can I trust you? Are you committed to excellence? And do you care about me? The very things that those handshakes had done. And it taught me at the time, don't do anything to cut corners.
And I think a lot of people in business or in political life generally, that's the hardest thing, isn't it? Is to maintain that truth, that sort of identity. And did you find that when you were interviewing people, that was the common thread that came out, was this need to be authentic, or the need to represent your core values?
I think part of it was when I was doing the interviews, I had already had a relationship built on trust. So they knew that whatever they told me, I was going to use it, in the best way for them. I wasn't going to take advantage of them. And I think that's the key to success of any relationship that you have, whether it's a business or a personal relationship. It's the idea, am I going to put your best interest ahead of my own best interest? And if we can do that with relationships that we have, no matter where those relationships are, I think you can build any organization, or you can have any family or any organization that's successful.
And if we go back to turning points, because there are probably countless people out there who have greatness ahead of them, but they just don't realize it. So their lives will be going down one particular path when it could quite easily be another path. It's very easy to recognize these turning points with hindsight and looking back.
Yep.
What advice do you have to people to be able to recognize those turning points or those opportunities at the time that they're actually being presented?
Yeah, I mean, what you said is so true. There was a baseball catcher who used to play for the New York Yankees back in the 1950s and 60s named Yogi Berra. And Yogi Berra, when told that the first female mayor of Dublin, Ireland, had just been elected, he said, only in America. So I was looking for research for turning points, and I discovered that Yogi Berra had said something about turning points, these forks in the road. And I found out Yogi said, when I get to a fork in the road, I take it. And unfortunately, that's what most of us do. We don't pay attention to these paths that we take in life. Somebody comes into our lives and we make a decision about that person, or a moment in time we make a decision, and we don't pay attention to, is it a good and wise decision? I think if we concentrate on paying attention to the people who come into our lives, the most moments in time, and learn from those unexpected events, and then take those turning points in our lives, make good and wise decisions. And it just means slowing down in life, paying attention to what's going on in your own life, and then fully committing to the decisions that you make.
Which is quite tough, though, because again, if we go back, cast your mind back 27 years to when you were sitting in this closet. And again, I had this visualization of a room where you're literally shoulder to shoulder with somebody thinking, what have we done? The challenge is really, how do you know if a decision is a wise decision? What I'm getting to really is, how important is it to trust or to rely on your intuition, to rely on your gut feel? Because that was the only thing that took you through that 14-month period.
It is the most important thing that you have to do, is to believe intuitively in what you feel is the right thing to do. And the problem is that we just don't pay attention to those moments in our lives, and we believe something, but we don't follow through on it because we're not giving the attention to it that we should.
I mean, some people would call that a moral compass, as it were. I mean, it's that sort of idea. So, and again, reading through all of the individual pieces about, in your book, what does come out is that these people have managed to understand or find that belief or that feeling in themselves, and despite everything, despite the challenges that they faced, they've managed to maintain that true course.
Right. All those people are different, so they're not all the same kind of personalities, but the thing that they have in common is they've recognized their turning points and they've taken advantage of these turning points. It would have been easy for me to say, when I was a teenager, unsure I had a future, that I was going to follow the path of my family and ignore the advice of a teacher who I could have easily said, well, that teacher doesn't know that much about me, I don't need to go to college. That would have changed my life totally. I could have easily said to my wife at the time, I've been doing this for 17 years. I know better what I want to do. But you listen to somebody else, you listen to those moments in time, you listen to those people, and you try to determine, what are they saying to you that you're not paying attention to in your own life, that you're not thinking about in your own head, and that's the key. And then making a decision that, is what they're saying have some credibility to it, and if it has credibility to it, then it's important to follow it.
Because I think everyone loves giving advice, and I think part of the trick really is to figure out whose advice is actually worth taking.
Right.
So I guess when you were building the business, you must have been pushed and pulled from one direction to another, particularly if you're in that sort of hotbed of political intrigue that is Washington. So what sort of moments, did you face any moments where you thought, I've just got this wrong? Were there moments, I don't call them failure, but were there moments when you thought, we've just done this wrong, and how do we recover from this?
Well, there are, in Washington, D.C., after we started getting well known and established, we were under a lot of pressure to take, you take one speaker because you believe in that speaker and you like what they have to say and what they stand for. And at the end comes along, they have a friend or somebody who's pushing them to say, oh, you got to get me into the Washington Speakers Bureau. So, we face those challenges on almost a daily basis. The fact that to try to decide, who do we want to let into our lives? Who do we want to represent? And you really have to have a moral compass in order to do that, to believe, that, what are your values, and what are those values? Am I going to live up to those values and stay with it? And once you start giving in to those values, the things that you establish for yourself in life, that's when you're heading down the wrong path or not paying attention to where you're going.
Which you talked about earlier was cutting corners. So, and again, what I'm thinking about is, if you're starting a business or if you're doing any venture, it is so easy to be pulled off track because you're so vulnerable and subject to outside influences, because it doesn't matter how much, in my experience, you really believe in what you're doing. If someone whispers in your ear and you think they're half credible, then it's so easy just to sort of go along the wrong path.
Right.
So,
I think it's important to have you have to have a goal in mind, and nothing can divert you from that goal. And so when you listen to these outside voices, you've got to determine, as far as your goal is concerned, are those people pulling you away from your goal, diverting you from your goal? Are they adding something to that goal? And I think part of it is you just have to know where you're going. You can't just figure out, I'm heading in a direction. I want to start a famous company. I want to start a company that makes me money. I want to have the best coffee shop in the world. You've got to have a singular goal in life and follow that one goal in life. And then when the voices come along, you have to decide, are those voices pulling me in one direction?
One other one from my goal.
And that's the same for business. It's the same for politics. It's the same for relationships. Is that the sort of common thread that you've picked up?
Oh.
That vision, that clarity of vision, and then following that vision, following your gut feel. It seems very linear. I mean, is that the secret that you've discovered?
Well, you have to. I think it's so important to follow that one direction, and it doesn't mean that they're not paths off to one side or another side, but until that one goal that you have in mind has to be the most important goal that you have, and you have to be focused on it. I mean, that's part of being passionate, being deliberate about something, is that you have to follow your goal and you have to stay with it.
You mentioned earlier about Facebook. Part of the issue, not the issue, but part of who we are is who we feel we belong to. In other words, who we socialize with and who our group of friends. Over the last 20, 30 years, you've seen seismic changes in the way that people understand what's going on in the world. What advice do you have for people that are buried in this sort of bubble that is Facebook or social media?
Well, I mean, you walk down the streets today and virtually everyone has got a telephone right in front of their face, looking at some tweet or some email or on Facebook or something like that. I think that's the problem especially with young people today, is that they just don't have the good examples and the heroes in life beyond social media personalities, and therefore, who do they look up to? I knew when I was growing up that I had a certain group of people that I looked up to, that I believed in, and some may have been a politician, some may have been a sports figure. But today, young people today, you ask the question, who do you believe in? And it's always somebody associated with social media. And unfortunately, those are bad examples. It was one of the reasons I wrote the book in the first place. These examples in the book are older examples of people that I grew up with. So they're not names that young people know. But I honestly wrote the book for young people today because they don't have these good examples, and they need to see that, that we all have the same turning points in life, and we need to learn from each other. And unfortunately, we just learn the wrong things. We learn something superficial rather than something with substance.
And you're right, because I think the icons of today are people that have 10 million YouTube followings for standing on their head whilst drinking a glass of water or something. I remember reading people here in your book that resonated for me, people like Tony Blair, Condoleezza Rice, Colin Powell. I remember these people. I remember thinking that these are untouchable people. You just think, how do these people how is it possible for someone to be that person? And the more I read your book, the more you sort of unwind the clock. Tony Blair, for example, the story about him, he was one of the Beatles roadies. So he jumped in a car, had no money, drove up to London, decided that he wanted to be in a rock group. He ended up being prime minister. So it's funny how these stories that you have in your book, they do make it seem so much clearer what the pathway is that anybody, if you disregard all the noise on social media.
Yeah, and what I was trying to do with the stories was to let the reader see themselves in each of these stories, to say, I've experienced that. I feel some part of my life has been like that. So I wanted people to be able to see themselves so that they could make changes in their lives and realize that certain things that they're doing in life are good, or certain things they're doing in life are not good.
And storytelling, I think what makes a good speech, because your business must have changed significantly over the 27 years that you've been there.
Right.
How do you see it changing over the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, I think the one thing that has not changed is that whoever is a speaker has to have a personal story, a story that's important, because you got to relate to the people that are in the audience. So often we represented not just famous people, but somebody who had cancer and climbed Mount Everest, or there's a girl in the book, Liz Murray, who was a teenager of drug-addicted parents who went homeless on the streets and the subways of New York City, only to make a decision in life whether she wanted to go one path to have pizza with her friends and she was hungry, or go another path, the last opportunity she could get back into high school. And most of us would have said, well, I'm unhappy with the way society is treating me, especially when you're homeless on the streets of New York.
Yeah.
I'm going to just go get pizza. And decided to go one last opportunity to get back into school. And she ended up graduating from Harvard.
Yeah.
So, I mean, these turning points are not just famous people like Condoleezza Rice or Tom Brokaw or Colin Powell, but they're all of us. I mean, down to a person who is homeless and doesn't have much hope about overcoming, living on the streets of New York City. So I think I'm sorry, that was what I was thought important.
Yeah, no, you're right. But what are these people like? So you live with these people, you spend all your time with these people. What are they like? Are they unapproachable? Are they standoffish? Are they?
I told you, I think when we were talking, or before we even started the interview, that I have liked 99.9% of the people that I've represented. I attribute this to the fact that I never asked them to sign a piece of paper signing their loyalty to me, or saying I'm going to give you 2 years of my life no matter what you do to me, but that I'm shaking hands and I can trust you for looking at the best in me. So I think that whole idea of trust, which is, I think, unique to business. I think it's more important in personal relationships and family, of course, but I think that's been the key. And I think when suddenly a president of the United States or a prime minister says, goes against the advice of a lawyer who's saying, no, you have to sign a contract, and I'm insisting I'm not signing a contract no matter what. I will shake your hand and live up to your expectations. That sets a tone between them and me, that sets a relationship, a friendship, that begins on the right track. And I think we can do that with our family, and we can do that with our friends. That's what's important in life, that people trust us and we trust them.
And do you think that is being eroded? Or do you see a decline in that sort of requirement for trust? Or do you think there's going to be almost a resurgence, as it were, where there's been so much noise and people have gone along all these different paths, and trust will be the one defining?
Yeah, I'm forever hopeful, but I have to admit that I'm somewhat discouraged with the political environment, in the United States today. I just think, we're making decisions about things without much thought behind them. And you talk about turning points. I mean, I just shake my head sometimes thinking, some of the politicians today, what are they learning from other people? What are they learning from the moments in time that they're experiencing and unexpected events? What are they learning from their turning points? Are they learning anything at all?
Yeah.
Or are they really paying attention to the paths that they're taking? Are they just living up to what Yogi Berra said, that I just take any path that happens to be there? So I'm a little discouraged, about where we're going in the country, and I'm hoping it'll change.
And there is, and again, because this is sort of at odds with the concept of living by abundance as opposed to scarcity, because the common thread that I picked up in your book was that all the people that you interviewed there, they were giving, they were willing to share, they were willing to put their lives on the line in some cases, and not necessarily want anything in exchange. The world seems to be a different place to some people, it seems, because it's much more about, what can you do for me? So do you think it's that abundance mentality that has made all the people that you've worked with so successful?
I think it is to a great degree. I think it's the way you treat people, that in turn that people treat you in return. I think that's the key to anything in life, is that we treat people well and then we live up to whatever they expect of us. We live up to whatever we expect of ourselves. That is the key. It all starts with us. It doesn't start with, how many Facebook friends that I have, or what my title in business is, or how much money I'm making. It all comes down to, what kind of a person am I? Am I doing, in my relationships with other people, am I doing good in those relationships? Am I living up to my own expectations? Do I have a moral compass? Am I doing the right thing? Do I, as Lou Holt says, do I care about others? And I think that's the key. And
is that something that you've come full circle to believe and to understand?
I'd like to think, that when I was, 36 years old and first started the company, that I felt that way, but it's certainly been something I learned. Most of my friends would say, "Oh, those famous people you represent, they had opportunities I don't have. They have money. They have chances that I'm never going to be given in life." And part of writing the book was to show that, it's just the opposite. These people have the same turning points as the people who were complaining and telling me, what these people were like. It just depends on what we do with them. It depends on our moral compass and what kind of a person we are.
And I think, and it's the simplicity of the message that you give, which is there aren't 10 or 20 or 30 steps you have to take to be successful. It's just simplicity. It's passion, determination, trust, understanding who you are, having a vision and following that. It's like, the 5 steps to greatness. It's simplicity itself.
And it's not things that I forgot about this or I forgot about that. It all bonds together. All those things that you just said all come in one package. And that's what's important, is that we keep that package in front of us, so we're paying attention to it.
Which is fantastic. Well, it's fabulous to hear that it is that just simplicity. It is that, and that simplicity, that bedrock, that foundation, that creates leaders. It creates change. It creates security, safety, enjoyment, all of those things. It's simplicity itself.
Well, yeah, I agree totally.
I think that's fabulous. So, talking of simplicity, I'm going to move on to my questionnaire now.
Okay.
So this is my questionnaire that I borrowed from James Lipton. I say this every time, and I'm sort of slightly worried that I'm going to get an email from James Lipton's lawyers saying, I guess if I say in every interview that this is his, I think he borrowed it himself anyway. But
right.
So my 10 questions are as follows, and I can't wait for your answers. So my first question is, Bernie, what is your favorite word?
My favorite word is yes. Somebody is willing to do something. Somebody will try something, and they're willing to give it a chance.
Fantastic. And what is your least favorite word?
I hate the word no. Or I hate the word can't. And because right away it establishes exactly what you can't do.
Can't is like won't. It's not like can't do it. It's, you know what I mean? I understand exactly what you mean.
It's not like you've just tried and you said, well, I couldn't do it. You're already pronouncing the fact that I can't do it. I don't have the ability to do it, but you haven't even tried yet.
The frustration, yes. So what are you most excited about right now?
I'm excited about. I'm still excited. The book has been out in September. I'm still excited about the reaction of the book. I'm still selling quite a few books, which I'm really pleased with, and I'm getting a lot of emails and telephone calls from people, especially young people today. So I'm excited about the lessons that people are picking up from the book. It's gratifying to me. You know, I never wrote a book before. It took me a long time to do. I'm not a great writer, but I just wrote it. I put my heart into it. So. I get a lot of satisfaction from the people who say, you know, I've given that to my children.
Oh, fantastic. And what turns you off right now?
Leadership in this country. Frustrating. I just had my first grandchild, 4 months old. Wow. My daughter just wrote a letter to her 4-month-old telling her, you know, what was going on in the country. And it was both an amazing letter that she wrote, but also at the same time sad that she would have to write a letter saying, you know, she's worried about the direction of the country.
Yes, yeah, interesting times, definitely. I can tell you.
Yeah.
So, what sound or noise do you love?
I love the wind. It's calm. It's natural, and you know, and it's just peaceful.
And what sound or noise do you hate?
Traffic. I live in New York City for a couple months a year, and it used to be where the taxi drivers didn't honk their horns, and now they're back to honking their horns, and it drives me crazy.
Which leads us nicely onto my next question, which is, what is your favorite curse word?
Well, I don't do curse words, but when I like I jam my finger or I do something I don't want, I do say damn.
Yeah, which is again another word that just can be used in any circumstance.
It pops out.
And what profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
I would love to have been a singer, but I can't sing.
Fantastic. And what profession would you not like to attempt?
You know, I don't think there is one. I mean, I find something good in everything. I mean, I've thought many times, you know, if I hadn't gone to college, I could have ended up sweeping the floors somewhere, and I would have been the best sweeper of floors that there could have been. So,
oh, wow. And my final question, Bernie, is if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
You've done a good job.
That's fantastic. Well, Bernie, thank you so much for being a guest on Hooked on Startups. My final question is, how do people get hold of you? How do they get a copy of your book, What Made Me Who I Am?
Well, it is on sale. It's on Amazon. You can read the reviews on Amazon, people who have read the book and written reviews about it. People can email me anytime they want. I have a website, bernieswain.com, and you can leave messages, and I always answer messages. And if you have any questions, you know, I'd be glad to do it. You know, I am on Facebook, and, you know, only because my publisher makes me be on Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn and enjoy that. If anybody needs me, I'd be glad to answer any questions anytime.
And is there another book coming out?
I have a TED Talk coming up in November, and I have about 4 or 5 speeches that I have to do in the book and book appearances. Once that winds down, I'm going to start giving some thought to another book and trying to figure out what I want to write. And I haven't quite got it in my head yet, but I like the process. So maybe in about 2 years, we can talk again.
Fantastic. Well, Bernie, I look forward to grabbing your TED Talk and following your progress. Thanks once again.
Great. Thank you very much. This has been a great honor for me. Thank you.